May I speak in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, here we go. If you've journeyed with us for a few weeks, you will recognise what's about to come. But if it's your first time here, just to let you know that this summer we're embarking on a journey through hearing our collective team hear stories of their vocation, thinking about what it is that makes us tick, if you like, in ministry and in life. And unfortunately, particularly if you're visiting, you've drawn the short straw to listen to me this morning. Stories are an interesting thing. Stories shape us. Stories give us purpose. They give us narrative. And my story is one that's far from the perfect picture of harmony, from the glorious surroundings of green, flowing hills. In fact, it's a story for me that started from a young age, but really came to fruition in my teenage years, at least in a Christian sense. Because I came to faith, claimed the faith for myself, if you like, as a teenager. During those years, I struggled with who I was as an individual. I struggled with my self-worth, what it means to be present here in the world. And in this season of my life, not that you might expect it now, I used to love skateboarding. Yes, I am twice the size I once was. And I used to love mountain biking and all the associated culture that came with it. And that was my outworking. And with that was music. I loved music. Specifically, I loved ragey music, which had lots of shouting, lots of loud guitars, lots of drums, and gave some voice to the angst that I was feeling within me. It was during this season that I encountered what were frankly a weird bunch of Christians. They used to turn up at the skate park we used to hang out at in a van and give us hot chocolate and other things. They used to talk to us. They used to enter into our story. They then went on to set up what they affectionately called a non-alcoholic bar in the tower of the church in the town we lived in, and invited us all in for Coke floaters and alike. But in reality, I didn't really have much interest in what they had to say, but it was their actions that shaped and formed my life. You see, they went out of their way and they gave their time freely so that they may have relationship and contact with teenagers. It transpired that those people became some of my friends, but that was largely because when it was raining, we used to go and hang out with the Christians. When our friends got too worse for wear and needed to be treated in hospital, we used to go to the Christians who would look after us. When we were running away from another group who was trying to fight us for any manner of different reasons, we went and sought refuge amongst the Christians. And so that's how the relationship built. Those Christians got to know me quite well over the years, and they knew I was into music, and so they asked me whether I might want to come to one of the concerts they go to. And in typical teenage fashions, I said, "Not on your Nelly, you weirdos." But, alas, because they had been so kind, a few weeks passed and I rescinded my initial reaction and said, if I must come with you, because you're nice people, I will sit at the back, but I shall not be partaking in any of that weird Christian stuff. Okay. To which they generously and kindly agreed and took me along. Anyway, all I can ever say happened at that very strange Christian concert is I can't remember what was said and I can't remember what was played. But I can remember this. I was sat at the back and I had this overwhelming sense of what I would now call the presence of God. Some people refer to it as thin spaces, where God felt tangibly present, where God felt real in a way that I had never experienced in my life. And there, at the back, sat me, full of anger and frustration and insecurity, and started crying. For what frankly was no apparent reason. But this presence overwhelmed me. In that moment, it changed my perspective of who God was. That God wasn't someone who these Christians talked about who was thousands of years old, but God was also someone who was present and real and knowable. It spoke to my heart, and that moment changed my life. Fast forwarding a number of years, I will cut out the middle bits. But my call to step into, if you like, what I would term formal Christian ministry or the priesthood came, initially anyway, at a summer conference. I'd been working for 6 months out in America, doing summer camps for children and young people, having an absolute ball, and I came back and someone had bought me for my birthday a ticket to go to a Christian concert, a conference thing in the summer with about 3,000 or so other young people. Once again, I can't tell you what happened. I can't tell you what words were said, what songs were sung. But I can tell you this. There's one moment in that whole week of Christian experience that stuck out for me. And that was hearing a guy called Brother Andrew talking. Some of you may know Brother Andrew. He wrote quite a famous book called The God Smuggler. And during the Cold War era, he used to smuggle Bibles in his car across into communist countries. A Dutch Christian missionary. He's also later the founder of the charity called Open Doors, who looks after and prays for and seeks to care for the persecuted Christians and the persecuted church. But Brother Andrew was talking at this event, and I could not tell you what he said, short of this one thing. At the end, he said to the people there, he said, I want you to make a covenant promise with God. At this point, he knew he was talking to a bunch of teenagers, so he layered it on thick. And he said, I don't mean the, yeah, right, sort of a promise. He said, one that speaks to your heart, one that is central to who you're going to be. And if you're going to respond to this and pray in this way, you need to know that it's going to shape and form your life, because it is a covenant promise with God. And so he said, this covenant promise with God that I'm asking you to make is simple but challenging at the same time. He says, will you make a covenant promise with God to go wherever he calls you? Well, I am not, as my previous description may have been, one of those who comes to the front of church running with my arms up or spinning around. So I sat in my seat, like a good Anglican, sort of quarter of the way, or probably even further, a good third of the way down the venue, sitting in my seat solidly. But again, and it's the only 2 times this has happened to me, but again I experienced this overwhelming sense of the presence of God. And that moment shaped my vocational life, my life for what I might do. And it led me through experiences that led me into the priesthood. Now, I summarise that, I think, in this way. In my life and in the world around me, I've experienced much brokenness, much pain, and much challenge. The faith that I inherited first at that initial stage, and then now seek to proclaim in the role I have, is one that gives me knowledge that there is a light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness hasn't overcome it. My call to priesthood is about being a bearer of good news, to point people towards that light, helping people see that there is a bigger narrative and that they are part of it, that they don't need to live in guilt, fear and anxiety because God has come near and salvation is available to all. Or, in a more succinct summary, my call is to help people find their way back to God. So that's my vocational story. But I don't know about you, I personally find the word vocation a tricky one. It comes with some strange connotations, for me anyway, of hierarchy, of role, of function, and it can both be a word that's used to empower and undermine all at the same time, and it can feel a bit complicated. I've had several conversations where someone has been waxing lyrical about their vocation, and although I am exceptionally pleased for them, I often come out of those conversations feeling somewhat second-rate as a Christian. Or I've been in other conversations where the opposite is true, where people have bemoaned their lack of sense of vocation, and they almost feel that they're lower than other people, and they seem to therefore look to others who seem to have a vocation and put them on a vocational pedestal. Now, I say that purely to acknowledge that these feelings are real, true, and valid, because to my mind, it can create an unhelpful hierarchical outlook, with some people being super Christians. You see, if you asked me, every person who confesses the Christian faith has received a calling from God by virtue of that confession, and therefore they have a vocation. It's not just the preserve of those who are called to priestly ministry. Some books separate vocation and calling, but that delineation for me feels marginal and nuanced. You see, I think there is merit in trying to express some of those subtleties of the Christian journey, but the division can be a bit of a red herring, because if you say yes to Christ, you have a role, you have a vocation, you have a thing, that is, to be a disciple, to be imitators of Christ, to be conformed to his likeness, as St. Paul would say. Our vocation is as disciples of Christ, and that is a high calling. So we're not easily let off by saying we don't know what we should be doing, because our scriptures tell us so. The vocation of us all is when we say yes to God, is one that forms our theological, sociological, moral and ethical DNA. It should impact every aspect of our lives, of our being, no matter what we are doing. Within that one vocation, there may be separate vocational expressions. For me, that was in the police, as a Christian police association, when I was a member there, as a youth worker, as a schools worker, as a priest, as a church planter, as a foster carer. All of those are deep vocations and callings in my life, but they stem for me from the expression of the vocation that it is to be a disciple of Christ, to see where God is moving and to seek to follow him. So, I am coming into land, I promise you. No matter where you are, no matter what your age, young or old, no matter where you work, no matter where you live, you should be living out your vocation, your thing, to follow Christ, to be formed and guided by him. Going back to Brother Andrew, he said this: "The Bible is full of ordinary people that went to impossible places and did wondrous things simply because they decided to obey God." Obedience takes courage. And so I wonder, 2 questions as we go from here. How are you living your life now as a follower of Jesus? And what might Jesus be asking you to do in this season as your vocational expression?